the most haunted locations from around the world. I've touched on a lot of creepy things so far in this channel. Serial killers, mythical creatures, folklore, SCPs, but I've never discussed ghosts directly. But today, that changes, and I'm gonna answer all your questions about these haunted locations. Like, how did it become haunted? What ghostly encounters have been recorded? And are these places even really haunted? The year is 1835. And you have just been invited to a beautiful Christmas get-together at one of your friends' manors in the English countryside. The manor was just absolutely beautiful, and this party was packed with notable people, respected colonels, wealthy businessmen, and high-ranking government officials. The night consisted of seemingly endless food and drinks and music, and everything was just so perfect. Late into the night, once the party started to die down, you and a group of friends decided that it was time to go to bed, and you all went your own separate ways to get to your bedrooms. You turn down a hallway and you're finally by yourself and only steps away from your bedroom, when you notice down this hallway there's this woman, a woman that was wearing only brown clothing. You didn't recognize this woman from the party, but this isn't your house, and you didn't know everybody at this party, so you figured it was somebody else also going to their room. This woman was slightly notable due to the apparel that she was wearing, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, and you continued to your room and had a good night's rest. You woke up the following morning on Christmas Eve and engaged in the morning festivities. The party was still not done. There was a huge brunch being served, and you and everybody else were not going to miss it. You sit down at a table with some of your friends, one of which being a colonel, and he mentions that last night he saw a rather peculiar woman. Another person at your table asks, what did she look like? And the colonel goes on to explain that on his way to his bedroom, he saw a woman dressed exclusively in brown robes. These robes were dated and tattered and had to have been at least from the previous century. It didn't look right at all. And the colonel was concerned because this woman might have been somebody who either snuck into the manor or was somebody who was obviously lost. But the colonel mentioned once he spotted this woman and walked closer to her and then tried approaching her, he realized this woman had turned around and he got a look at her face. And that's when he claimed that he saw this woman's bright white face with empty eye sockets, and the man was terrified. He didn't scream or run away, but he quickly made his way to his room without asking any more questions. Instantly, your heart dropped to your stomach because you also saw the same woman, but you didn't see her face. And before you could say anything, another woman at the table says, I also saw a lady dressed up in brown. I didn't see her face, but she was standing in the hallway, not saying anything and not moving. And your heart and stomach only sank deeper. You noticed that the host of the party was sitting beside you, and her face was in shock. You asked her, who is this lady wearing these brown rags? And she confessed that she had absolutely no idea. The Christmas party was a formal event and everybody was dressed in their absolute best. Nobody was wearing brown, and there was nobody in the party with sunken in, missing eyeballs. The host of this party quickly stands up on her chair and started clinking a spoon on her glass, causing the conversation in the room to a silence. And the host of the party asked, did anybody see a woman in brown robes anywhere in the manor last night? And to her dismay, numerous people in this room of nearly 100 people raised their hand. The story I just told is based on a real documented encounter that happened in 1835 at a Christmas party. And this story is significant because it is the first recorded sighting of the ghost that is now known as the Brown Lady at the iconic Raynham Hall. And this isn't the only sighting that's taken place, and it's probably not even the most iconic either. And only days after this event, when the host of the party made the staff aware of all of these claims, people literally quit their jobs and never returned out of fear of encountering this strange apparition. But that's not it. There was a handful of sightings on that night in 1835, but the following year in 1836, Captain Franklin Marryat, who is actually a friend of Charles Dickens, heard tell of the legend of this brown lady in the Raynham Manor and spoke to the owner directly and requested that he stay in the most haunted room of them all so he could prove that there was no ghost at all and that this legend simply came to be because the owner of this manor wanted to keep people away from his property. And let's just say he got more than he bargained for. This captain checked into the hotel and stayed in a room that literally had a painting of the apparition hung in the room. Like I mentioned, at this point, the Brown Lady was already a local legend and a common sighting within the hotel. And for the first 2 nights of his visit, the captain had a normal experience. He was staying in a hotel and rather comically was sleeping with a loaded revolver under his pillow just in case. And it was after the second night and the beginning of the third night when everything began to change. Because on night 3, Frederick didn't get a good night's sleep at all. What he did get was a run-in with the Brown Lady. Frederick had just gotten into bed and was ready to go to sleep when he noticed something in front of his door. The door never opened, but there was obviously a shadow of some sort in front of the door blocking the path. The shadow was moving and getting bigger until Frederick realized that this shadow was exactly what he was looking for. He quickly looked at the painting on the wall and noticed that This was the brown lady, and she was in his room, and she was getting closer to him. Frederick grabs the revolver from under his pillow, points it at the apparition, and screams at the top of his lungs, "Stop! Don't come closer! I'm going to shoot!" But the brown lady grew a menacing grin and began to get closer, practically at the foot of his bed, when Frederick pulled the trigger, shot the revolver into the darkness, and the apparition disappeared. 3 hotel workers came into the room to ask what had just happened, and Frederick left the hotel and never returned. I tried to only tell one story per section, but I figured that story was kind of worth going into detail over. Over the late 1800s and early 1900s, there was a plethora of other run-ins with the brown lady, which brings us to Captain Hubert C. Provant, who not only had a run-in with the brown lady, but was able to capture a picture of her, a full-body apparition. And this photo is not only iconic to the Raynham Hall, but it's also one of the most iconic photos in all of ghost hunting. This photo was taken in 1936, and since this photo has been taken, sightings have been few and far between, although many people still believe to this day that Raynham Hall is haunted. Once again, just a crazy story, but you might be thinking, okay, sure, there's this ghost there, but who is this lady and how did she get there? And because this section's getting long, let me boil it down. According to the legend of the brown lady, the Townsend family, which was the family that owned the Raynham Manor, after numerous run-ins with this apparition, was able to identify her from one of the paintings that was displayed within the manor. The woman was named Dorothy Walpole, who lived from 1686 to 1726, and was the sister of Robert Walpole, who is considered the first ever Prime Minister of Great Britain. She was the second wife of Charles Townshend, one of the original Townsends that owned the manor, and this man was well known for having a short temper. Allegedly, this man had caught Dorothy with another man, a lord, and as punishment, he locked her in her room in the manor, and she was never allowed to leave. She wasn't allowed to see friends, family, or even her own children. She was a prisoner in her own home until 1926, when she passed away from smallpox. Obviously, that story is upsetting both ways, because if Dorothy did cheat, then that's awful. But Charles had absolutely no right to do any of that whatsoever. If somebody cheats on you, you just break up with them. You say, hey, you get out of my manor, we're done. You don't say, hey, I'm gonna trap you in this room until you die. To this day, Raynham Hall is one of the most iconic haunted locations in all of England. But this is one of the more tame entries on the list, and we're only just getting started. It's the mid-1800s, and you are a medical doctor, Dr. Charles Finney. You live in Atchison, Kansas, and you run a successful medical operation out of your home. This home was something your family recently commissioned, and now you were both living in it and making it your place of business, at least for now. And everything was going smoothly until one night. You were in bed, exhausted after a long day, with your eyes feeling like they're each 1,000 pounds, just begging to be closed. And as you're on the verge of sleep, about to drift off, you hear a knocking at your door. This was extremely uncommon. You obviously had no appointments in the dead of night, and you had no idea who this could be. Reluctantly, you get out of bed and head to your front door. And when you open the door, you notice a woman standing there, holding her young daughter. This woman is frantic and explains that her daughter is in severe pain, and she can't walk, can't move, and she is in endless, excruciating pain coming from her abdomen. The doctor's fatigue instantly wears off, and he's back in work mode. And he invites the woman and the daughter in, and quickly takes them to his basement examination room, where he's able to identify the likely source of all of this pain, an inflamed appendix that was about to burst. The doctor informed the mother that this young girl needed emergency surgery now, and the mother agreed, saying, please, anything to save my daughter. The doctor quickly prepped the location, washed his hands, grabbed his tools, and then began to administer the anesthesia. Once everything was ready and the medicine was administered, the doctor hastily made the first incision. Although little did he know, the anesthesia that he had administered was an improper dose, and this girl, who was already in pain, was now in even more pain, as she could feel everything. And this incision that the doctor had just made was the final straw. Her body went into shock, and not long after, she passed away on that operating table. That young girl's name was Sallie, and this story is the reason why this location is known as the Sallie House. First thing I'm going to say right off the bat is, as interesting as that story is, there is absolutely no recorded evidence for that story actually being true. And it's largely regarded as a folktale, loosely based in reality. Dr. Charles Finney was a real doctor, and he worked in Atchison, Kansas, and he lived out of his practice that his family had recently commissioned. That all is true. But as far as the story of Sallie is concerned, there was no physical evidence. But the reason I mention the story is because it is the story that is most associated with this haunted location. And this haunted location is one of the most iconic in all of the United States of America. So yeah, I wanted to make that distinction primarily because I knew if I didn't, others would say that's not actually true, and well, it's not proven either way, but it is highly debated and not proven that it did happen, so I'll let you make up your mind on that. That story is upsetting and sad, but what does it have to do with haunted locations? Well, that story is kind of where everything began, because after this incident that may or may not have happened in the late 1800s, experiences in the Sallie House have been vast and plentiful. Some experiences only consist of hearing a creak or faint footsteps, or even the giggle of a young girl. But other encounters are a lot more sinister, with items being thrown, loud screams being heard, and even visitors being scratched to the point of bleeding. Nearly every former tenant or owner of the Sallie House that had been interviewed alleged to have experienced paranormal activity of some sort, typically with consistent attributes across all of the accounts, with some even claiming to see Sallie in the window at night when it was known that nobody was home. If you're watching this video, you're probably into the paranormal, which means you've probably seen some of your favorite ghost YouTubers stay in this house. Sam and Colby, Nick and Ryan, Exploring with Josh, or even large-scale TV productions. All of these people have stayed in the Sallie House and had unique experiences. So for that reason, I'm not going to go too much more into detail. But I will say this, the Sallie House hasn't been anybody's personal residence since the 1990s, and in more recent times has been a popular tourist attraction, which kind of makes you think, is the legend of the Sallie House real? Or do people just want to keep the story alive because there's a financial incentive? Regardless, the Sallie House is regarded as one of the most iconic haunted locations in the United States. The year is 1885. You and your wife are pioneers in New South Wales, Australia, and you have just finished building a double-story late Victorian-style manor on the top of a hill overlooking your local town. This was you and your wife's dream homestead, and you built it with your very own hands. The construction was a labor of love, and now you could enjoy this manor for the rest of your life. This manor became known as the Monte Cristo Homestead, and you and your wife enjoyed it up until your deaths. After you and your wife were long gone and your family had no longer lived in the residence, the house essentially was left abandoned. There were caretakers, but unfortunately, the Monte Cristo Homestead fell into disrepair. That was until it was purchased by another couple, Reg and Olive Ryan, and they were dedicated to building this beautiful manor back to its former glory, and that's exactly what they did. They took it from a derelict, abandoned home to something that was actually habitable. And once again, the homestead was a home again. And it wasn't long after Reg and Olive moved in that things began to get weird. One late night, only a few days after the Ryans had officially moved in, they were heading home after an event, when they noticed that as they approached their house, they could see bright lights beaming from inside the house, illuminating all of the windows. This caught Reg and Olive's attention, and they were both speechless at what they were looking at. Reg knew that the electricity wasn't even fully finished in the house yet, and for the places that did have electricity, he knew he left no lights on and no lamps burning. Olive was just in sheer terror, and the couple stopped halfway up their driveway in pure awe of what they were looking at. Their home illuminated in the middle of the night for no reason at all. Terrified, the couple approached the house, and the closer they got, the dimmer the lights got. And by the time they actually reached their new home, the house wasn't illuminated at all, and it was as dark as it should have been. The couple theorized that maybe they were just seeing the reflections of the headlight of their vehicle, but deep down they knew that wasn't what they saw at all. And this was only the beginning of the strange encounters that were going to take place over the next few years. Following this event, when the family decided to bring their family cat to their new home, instantly the cat was uncomfortable, which is common. This cat's in a new environment and was just in a car ride, something it didn't enjoy. But as soon as your wife put the cat on the floor, it arched its back and moaned in fear as if it was face to face with another cat. There was nothing there. The cat hissed and screamed and immediately ran out of the house. You, your wife, and your 3 daughters looked for the cat and never found your cat again. Following that event, there was numerous occasions where your daughters claimed that they could see a man's face out the window, which was impossible considering that all of your daughters had bedrooms on the 2nd floor, and there was never any unknown men near or around the property. The family frequently encountered disembodied voices and footsteps and noises, doors opening and drawers closing, and there was truly no explanation for any of it. After years of alleged strange and ghostly encounters, the homestead was converted into a museum, where it showcased antiques, local treasures, and became a tourist attraction with a gift shop, and became known as Australia's most haunted house. Since then, it was featured in numerous TV shows in the 70s, 90s, and early 2000s and 2010s. But very recently, in January of 2025, the homestead was actually closed to the public as Olive Ryan passed away. The Monte Cristo Homestead is likely one of the most famous haunted houses in all of Australia. And whether or not the paranormal experiences actually happened to Reg and Olive, or if they just made up stories to have a way to make money off of the house they just restored, I'll let you decide. The year is 1907, and the Dutch have just finished building a beautiful office building for their railway developments in Indonesia. Why the Dutch had a rail company and headquarters in Indonesia is a different conversation. But regardless, this building existed, and it looks really cool, and operated until 1942. That's because the Japanese invaded Indonesia, and they wanted everything, including this beautiful office building. You might be asking yourself, did the Japanese just use it as their office building? Now it's their headquarters in Indonesia? And the answer is no, because once they had total control of this building, they turned an entire wing of the building into a dungeon, specifically for torture and executions, something that wasn't uncommon for the Japanese in World War II. From 1942 until 1945, the building was under Japanese control, until Dutch forces tried to overtake the building from the Japanese. And in October of 1945, a battle took place within the building from Dutch troops who entered through a tunnel underground. Although the Dutch weren't only fighting the Japanese, they were also fighting the Indonesians. And the battle lasted 3 days, and the Dutch eventually retreated. Once World War II ended, the Indonesian army took control of the complex, and it was restored and given back to the Indonesian Railway Company, not the Dutch Railway Company. And in 1992, it was officially considered cultural property of Indonesia. From 1992 until 2009, this building was essentially left to rot, and over this time, it was vandalized, and nature had begun to take it back, with mold growing, parts of the building collapsing and falling apart, and locals beginning to have interesting stories regarding this building. This building, with quite the history, is known as Lawang, Sewu, and it is considered one of the most haunted locations in all of Indonesia. Lawang, Sewu is very interesting, and its history alone is something to be researched and talked about. During the time that this building was left in disarray, many local teenagers would make it a challenge to touch the building, or go near the building, or go inside the building, or even in extreme cases, stay overnight in the building. This massive building with such a dark and long history became a bit of an icon for all the wrong reasons, and everyone essentially considered it to be an evil, haunted building with dark energy and dark spirits associated with it, which kind of makes sense. Like, just imagine how dark the energy is being in a building, knowing the history. The unspeakable things that happened in this building, I could only imagine left some sort of energetic residue. Regardless, this building became very popular with thrill seekers in Indonesia. And it was over this near 20-year stretch when this building was falling apart that people had many strange encounters within the walls. Hearing voices, hearing footsteps, seeing apparitions, being scratched, being touched. All of these took place within the walls. The Indonesian government actually had plans of restoring this building, but were hesitant to do so because they feared that nobody would use or interact with the building because of the fear associated with it being haunted. But against their better judgment, they continued with the restoration project. And from 2009 to 2011, the building was restored. And in 2013, the building was officially open for tours. And currently, it's a massive hit for tourism in the region of Java, Indonesia, and sees over 1,000 visitors every single day. Now, here's the thing that's kind of interesting about this building. The government has official plans to, quote, eliminate the spooky image in order to attract more visitors, which I think is interesting because that's kind of the opposite of what most ghost house owners want, right? Like, they want to not only maintain but amplify the spooky image in order to bring in people. But I guess the difference is they are wanting to make this a historical landmark, but they are fearing that this image could scare people away, as especially in this region of the world, people are extremely superstitious when it comes to spirits. And there are plenty of locals that avoid this building entirely as they fear that going near or around this building could lead a spirit to follow you to your home and essentially bring you bad luck and negative energy. So yeah, Lawang Sewu over the last 120 years has had a very long and interesting and unfortunate history, including colonization, war, torture, executions, and other unspeakable things, I'm sure. But as the government allowed this building to sit and rot, the locals decided to have some fun and found a little bit more than fun. And today, the government has restored this building to make it a historical landmark and are doing their best to make sure that nobody talks about the whole ghost part of this building, which is kind of funny. Definitely one of the more obscure entries in this list. Before we get to the last entry on this list, I just wanted to make a quick point. Originally, this video was supposed to have 10 entries, not 5. But because it takes so long to animate the stories associated with each of these sections, I decided to just essentially cut it in half. I didn't want to sacrifice the storytelling or the information for the sake of having more entries on the list. I say this because there is a ton of other crazy, obscure haunted locations that I want to talk about. So consider this video a part 1, and if you guys want that second part, leave a like or leave a comment and I will post another video about the craziest and most obscure haunted locations from around the world. Now, back to the final entry of this list. The year is 1776. You are a healthy adult man living in Venice, Italy. You have a beautiful wife and a newborn son, and unfortunately you are experiencing the harsh wrath of the plague. It's killed numerous friends and family members of yours, but fortunately you, your wife, and your son are safe. for now at least, because you have to work every single day to be able to afford to live. Your family depends on you, and you try to be as safe as possible. That is, until you catch the plague. At this point in time, the government had a protocol for anybody who had caught the plague. And your fate was to be sent to the island of Poveglia, an island that at this point the Italian government was using solely as a quarantine station for those with the plague and other diseases. And that is where you went. You weren't able to say goodbye to your wife or son as it would pose too much risk to them. And you felt confident that if you went to this island, you would quarantine and come back a healthy man and return to your family. But unfortunately, almost as soon as you were shipped to this island, you were never heard from again. Your son was able to grow up through the plague and survive it. As time went on, the plague began to go away. Things began to change. One of the bigger changes that happened was the Italian government was no longer using Poveglia as a quarantine station, but as a remote mental institution. And unfortunately, your son, through the trauma that he experienced growing up in the plague, losing his father, and other hardships that he had in his life, found himself also on the island of Poveglia. This time, not because of the plague, but because of a mental disorder that was at the time not understood. The island of Poveglia at this point had claimed the lives of multiple generations in your family. But sadly, this wasn't unique to your family. Tens of thousands of people had perished on Poveglia Island. And it's because of that dark and death-filled history that Poveglia Island is regarded as not only one of the most haunted locations in Italy, but one of the most haunted locations in the entire world. From the late 1300s until the late 1900s, this small island was inhabited by people and used for multiple different reasons. The two primary reasons, the quarantine station and the mental asylum. There was likely an unspeakable amount of atrocities that took place on this island. And it's for that reason that after it was abandoned, people gained quite the interest in visiting it. The mental hospital was the last official use of this island. But when that institution closed in 1968, not only the building went abandoned, but the entire island became abandoned, leaving the buildings, the belongings, and the history to marinate. But it didn't take long for history buffs and thrill seekers to check it out for themselves. And that's when the legend began to grow of how haunted Poveglia Island really was. I've actually watched a video of somebody not doing a ghost hunt here, but just exploring the island. I believe it was Exploring with Josh I watched. And it's kind of unfortunate because although the history of this island is rather dark, the architecture is still beautiful. And the island itself is really unique. I could only imagine it would be a cool tourist attraction. Kind of like the Italian version of Alcatraz. You know how that had a really dark history but became a popular tourist attraction. Even though this entire island has been off limits from the day it closed to today, it's not stopped people from going. And it appears that almost everybody who has gone there has come back with a story, which has led to numerous different paranormal TV shows and even paranormal YouTubers to explore the island for themselves. There are no real famous notable claims of hauntings or specific apparitions on this island. There is just a general consensus among people who have been there that there is no doubt that this island is haunted, which they back up with the history of the building itself. This is definitely an example of a haunted location that I'd be more willing to take seriously simply because there's no financial incentive. This isn't something that somebody owns. Nobody's really gonna make money off of making a legend out of this. It is an abandoned building with a dark history that I'm sure the Italian government just wanted to kind of decay into nothingness. And if you're still hungry for some location-based content, check out the video on screen. It's a video about illegal places you can never go. It's story-based like this video, and it's full of interesting locations from around the world that would be really cool to visit, but unfortunately, you're never gonna be able to. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. And as always, trust me, bro.